is till I achieve a particular differential pressure which is constant. So this is run 1. Each filter starts off absolutely clean till it gets choked. Then we backflush this filter and run it again. You can see 53 micron, below 53 micron, 109 seconds it ran before it choked. Second run, it ran only for 62 seconds before it choked. Third run, it ran for 70 seconds. You can see I cleaned the filter. And fourth run, 50 seconds. So after each backflush, the efficiency did not improve. The interval between backflush was only coming closer. Now, you see 53 to 75. First run ran for 115 seconds. Second, 75. Third, 50. Fourth, I had a pipeline failure. The last one, 75 to 125. You're looking at really big particles over here. It ran for 145 seconds. Run 2, 125. Run 3, 125. After every backflushing, it is coming back to normal. So what basically we are finding is smaller particles go through without a problem. Larger particles, they are stopped, you push them, they go out again. The size of particle, which is very close to the size of the pore, they go and get embedded inside. That is very difficult to clean. This we cannot predict. Which port has got what size particle? And one more thing we do know that sand is, it's not easy for the sand to come to the filters because then you're looking at under keel clearance over there. So this is something mapping that we need to do. And 53 micron particle size is the maximum problem that we face because the size of the pore is 50 micron. Can you come to the conclusion slide, please? The one before that. Yeah. So the conclusion that we had from this experimental setup was the sediment size and distribution plays a major role in affecting the filter operation and backflushing efficiency, which is not at this present being discussed at IMO, and there's no scope of discussion because it's not a part of the agenda in any of the ballast water manufacturers plate at this point of time. Yes, filter manufacturers understand a bit and they're doing the research on their own on this. The particle size around the filter pore size is the maximum, which creates a problem. The filter design does not affect the filter performance and reliability, but is not a significant factor while backflushing efficiency. Backflushing efficiency, most of the filters are doing good because they all have a vacuum pump. But the issue comes with the pore and the particle size. All filter designs have reported to have failed in ports with challenging water qualities associated with high turbidity. The TSS load in real-time port water conditions far exceed the testing conditions requirement of 50 milligram per liter or 50 ppm as required by IMO. And the process, type of approval process, and nowhere in the approval process is the micron size rating mentioned. Now, the last statement I would like to make is, most of the plants which are tested in real test conditions do not have, so-called real test conditions, do not have the actual port water conditions. They all are around 50 milligram per liter, yes, but how much more than that? So I just mentioned MEPC 372, 50 plants have been approved. 36 plants have been tested between 50 milligram and 100 milligram per liter. And only 2 plants have been tested above 200 milligram per liter. So 48 plants are tested below 200 milligram per liter, whereas actual real-time water conditions are much more beyond this. And also we know, nowhere micron size rating has been described, nor in the testing condition, nor in the real-time data of the literature survey. Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mahesh. I think you can probably take the seat because this presentation has covered the time for the next presentation also, and the one which has been allotted for the entire session. So what do we do now with the, do we have time for the next paper, or because it's 6:30 is the closing ceremony, so we need to move to the next hall, I guess. So maybe we can give the young Lieutenant Commander a chance to at least come on the stage and present very fast some. Yeah, we'll move on to the next presentation. So I'll just introduce the speaker. He's Lieutenant Commander Mohit De. He is currently at INS Shivaji Marine Engineering Center of Excellence of Marine Engineering. He is carrying out instructional duties there. He joined the Navy in 2016 after having finished his civil engineering from VIT, and later he did postgraduate diploma in naval architecture from IIT Delhi. Important thing to note in his CV is what he's mentioned is his wife, Mrs. Prerna Mishra Day, is a manager at Axis Bank. And his daughter, Ms. Maria Day, is a 9-month-old mischievous infant. So in case there is any mistakes in the presentation, please pardon them.
Rear Admiral C.S. Baburaj, VSM, and respected dignitaries, I'll be very quick through this presentation. So my presentation is on the ultrasonic anti-fouling system. So traditionally, we know that all vessels have used anti-fouling systems in order to prevent the fouling load and thereby increase fuel efficiency and reduce resistance. This will discuss about one such technique which is more environmentally favorable and at the same time is cost effective. So this is the scope of my presentation. Basically, my presentation consists of 3 different chapters. First, I'll introduce on what is fouling, how fouling begins to grow. It is important when we are discussing this system to understand how fouling develops, because only when we know that what are the different levels of fouling development can we understand how to tackle it. After that, I'll give you a brief description about what ultrasonic anti-fouling system is, how it works, what are the parameters, and then we'll speak about some of the possible drawbacks and known drawbacks that the system has and how we can go ahead. So first, an introduction to fouling. We've known that traditionally the first anti-fouling systems can actually be traced back to around 400 BC, where people had different layers of papyrus coated onto the underwater surface of the hulls. Traditionally, however, more effective methods as an industry of anti-fouling has been developed somewhere in the early 17th century. How does fouling develop then? First, before when fouling develops, generally fouling can be divided into 2 main parts. One is the microfouling, the other is the macrofouling. Microfouling generally happens because of 3 main organisms. They are protozoa, algae, and bacteria. Now, the truth is any organic or inorganic body which when immersed in water will immediately begin to attract microfouling organisms. This is because they want a surface for better spreading. So immediately when anything is put into water, you have bacteria, protozoa, and algae beginning to develop. They attach themselves to surfaces with the help of secretions, which are nothing but polymers. And later, as they begin to grow, when higher algae and higher bacteria begin to attach themselves onto it, when we have microfilms on top of it, then their further secretions, which are nothing but again polymers, help them to adhere to the surfaces. Once you have a microfilm of these fouling organisms on a vessel, then it becomes very easy for the macrofouling organisms, which mainly consist of tube worms, barnacles, etc., to attach themselves to this feedstock, which is nothing but their food. Now, how have we been tackling this fouling system through ages? We've been tackling them by having mainly paint-based systems. All paint-based systems are nothing but leaching systems. So we have paints, we have several layers of paint on the underwater surface, which slowly begins to leach out into the ocean, and it prevents any organism from sticking onto it. Now the problem with this is initially we went on, when this technology first started, we were using things as harmful as arsenic, lead, tar for the coating of the vessels to prevent anything from attaching. Later, as we began to become more environmentally conscious, then more progressive methods of paints. So paints were nothing but, just like paints are, they consisted of a matrix of polymers, and these enzymes which prevented any micro or macro fouling organism from attaching onto it began to leach out onto the surface. Now, what are the problems that are faced with fouling? So problems we know, like basically there are several studies done which show that the amount of resistance of a vessel can increase from about 20 to 85%. So it is almost as good as 2 vessels sailing with the same amount. Obviously, this has direct and indirect things. The direct problems that we can see are, in order to maintain the same speed, I have to use more fuel. And when I'm using more fuel, this is having a direct economic impact on the amount of gases that I'm emitting into the atmosphere. But apart from this, this also reduces the efficiency of the machinery of my ship. So I have clogging on my sea chest and sea inlets. If I have sonar domes, their efficiency is reduced, the maintenance period is increased. So these are all direct impacts that I have. But some impacts that are currently not taken into account are also the introduction of invasive species. So I may have fouling from one particular region which attaches onto my hull, and I go and displace it to a different environmental region. And that becomes an invasive or an alien species. So the economic impact or even the studies of that have not yet been done. There is also a problem of biocorrosion. So there have been several studies which prove that because of the presence of fouling on the surface of hulls, the redox rate reactions because of the enzymes produced by these organisms changes, which basically accelerates the rate of corrosion. Now, the traditional methods of fouling, like I've said, basically have been all paint-based. We can divide them into two main parts, which can be physical and chemical. Physical methods, as we know, have not been very effective. That is, if you send a diver, or now actually there have been a lot of progress where there are automated systems which go and clean the whole hull, yet not so effectively. The mainstay yet, even now, of prevention of fouling is the use of paints. Now, in paints also, especially after the IMO regulation of 2008, which banned organotin, which had been in a lot of discussion since a lot before 2008, and now with effect from 1st January 2023, the chemical cybutyrin is being banned. Since then, we are becoming more environmentally conscious, as in now paint companies are also beginning to look at natural methods of preventing fouling. So this gives rise to something called sustainable methods of fouling prevention. So a lot of research papers have been written in this regard. Some of the technologies present here are, the main one is FRCs, that is fouling release coatings based on fouling release technologies. So what does this basically do is, fouling release technology means it is a modification of the surface so that it has high hydrophobicity, that is it prevents water itself from, it prevents water from attaching to the surface, it is hydrophobic. And next thing is, these things have something called low surface energy. By low surface energy, it means that they have lesser elastic modulus. So not only does it prevent water from attaching to the hull, it also prevents any organism from attaching to it because it has low elastic modulus.
Mohit, we'll have to wind up in the next 5 minutes, so you can go to your ultrasonic solution.
Yes, yes.
Because these are all traditional things which we are already doing.
Yes.
And second thing is that we'll have to also give, I think, 5 minutes to the photographer. That is his right.
Yes, sir. Okay. Now the ultrasonic anti-fouling system. So first, what is the principle on which it depends? So basically, this system uses acoustic methods. First, it says ultrasonic. So before ultrasonic, we can say that acoustic method of prevention of fouling. Now, in acoustic method, both I will be discussing basically about the ultrasonic range. That is not the 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, but above 20 kilohertz range. So generally, actually in the 1950s, it was discovered that the underwater portion of vessels around the sonar were found to be cleaner or more free from fouling than the remaining ship. That is when people, especially the Americans and the Russians, began to take note that perhaps this is something to do with the ultrasonic range. However, after that, a lot of studies have been done which have shown that if ultrasonic pulses are sent into the waters, so the different cycles of compression and rarefaction will lead to cavitation. Now we can have two levels of ultrasonic anti-fouling prevention also. One is the subcavitation, the other is the cavitation range. The subcavitation range primarily relies on vibration of the hull to dislodge any particle that may attach itself onto it. The cavitation range relies on cavitation, creation of the microjet, and the resultant microjet to clean off any system from the surface. So this is the basic working of the ultrasonic fouling system, where you have transducers which are being managed by a central unit which is controlling the frequency of the pulses. These transducers send out ultrasonic pulses, and these ultrasonic pulses in the rarefaction stage create such a negative pressure such that cavitation occurs, that resulting microjet from that cavitation bubble washes off the surface. What are the design considerations for this? The main design consideration obviously will be the frequency. So when we are discussing the frequency also, after a lot of studies and a few research papers that are written on this, so the most effective frequency range has been found to be 20 to 40 kilohertz. Now, in the frequency range also, it is not only a particular frequency that can be used. Several makers of this system rely on pulsed vibrations, that is, trying out different vibrations. Say for example, there is a paper written which has shown effective operation of this system when operated for 1 second and then given a break of 20 seconds. Similarly, there are other papers which operate the system for 0.5 and 0.5 seconds. This is time-based. Apart from this, there are frequency-based operations also. You may operate it for some time in some frequency band and later in some other frequency band. Now, how this operation is depends upon the maker of the ultrasonic anti-fouling system, which is not available in the public domain. The next aspect in this design will be the power. Now, initially, when this system began being looked upon as an alternative to paint-based systems, it was found that the higher you increase the power, the more effective the system was. In fact, power as high as 200 watts was used. However, now we have efficient systems which work on as less as 5 to 8 watts of power. So, however, increasing the power infinitely also does not mean increased effectiveness. There is a upper ceiling, after which there is an attenuation. Increase in power will not lead to further increase. This is a variation of how effective different frequency bands are against different organism types. Now, in this study also, about 20,000 different types of organisms have been noted to cause fouling, and some frequency bands which are effective against some classes of these organisms are listed here. The next factor that will be important is particle size. So, again, studies have proven that when there are impurities present in the seawater, then the effectiveness of the cavitation is higher. That is, the velocities are higher and they dislodge particles faster. This is about the working of the system. How do we measure the efficacy of the UAFS? For the measuring of the efficacy, one of the most effective methods is by the USS Naval Ship Technical Manual, which states 2 parameters. One is the fouling rating and in the percentage coverage. So basically it says that based on the severity of fouling, whether it is micro or macro, you can